So where we started was actually in mixing and agitating. This is where you'll have big mixing tanks with a motor and a gearbox and some sort of impeller to mix, whether it's liquids or powder or whatever it is. And often these things are manually driven in your small organizations. So what could happen is they're driven to failure, and the factory manager or management only knows about the failure when that thing no longer works. Not when it's vibrating or there's a big problem or something like that, when it's actually broken and no one can do anything about it. So by monitoring that, by looking at key things on that, and we look at vibrations, we look at power usage, we look at temperature, and we can infer some other data about that, such as torque, so the load, and put onto that equipment. And we can then see, is this thing starting to fail? You know, is it being overused? So sometimes what happens is the factory needs to increase their production a little bit because they're a bit behind. So the guys will crank up the power on the mixers a little bit to speed up the mixing. But obviously the equipment's not rated or designed to handle that for extended periods particularly. So the maintenance now needs to be done more regularly. And when something fails, some of this equipment requires import of gearboxes or parts from overseas. So now instead of someone can quickly come fix, it now becomes a 3 or 4 week waiting period, and now you're out of production. So a simple oil change, a simple bit of maintenance can often prevent that very costly exercise, and the real cost is the downtime, not so much the cost of actually repairing the equipment. And sometimes those costs are significant because suppliers will have very strict contracts from their customers in terms of delivery schedules. And if they meet those schedules, they can lose the contracts. So it can be a significant impact to businesses. And that's really one of the first opportunities that we developed this around. But it applies across any industry. So we do monitoring of any electrically rotating equipment, including the gearbox and bearings, and they're everywhere. They really are everywhere. So we've been looking at other industries such as refrigeration, agglomeration, cranes, really you name it. And our strategy there is to go in with partners who are experts in the industries. So we're not trying to be experts in the different industries or verticals that we get into, but we're building the expertise in monitoring rotating equipment generally, and then fine-tuning or honing that down to a particular vertical. It is a game changer. Some organizations will use periodic condition monitoring, where someone may walk around with a vibration sensor and other details and periodically record data about equipment. And that's sometimes done once a month. But now you can imagine in the intervening months, lots can go wrong. And now you might not have picked something up because that day everything was fine, and tomorrow it breaks or something starts happening where you could start doing maintenance. And that's really what's one part of the game changing. The other part is, I think the trend that we're seeing in the world is to move things from capital equipment costs to leased or service-based costs. So a lot of people who produce products are interested in having a production capability, not necessarily having a CapEx expense on their balance sheet. Now the vendors can start saying, well, if we can monitor the equipment that we provide to you as a service, and we know what state it's in, one, we can provide an SLA to you to say, we'll guarantee the availability and operation of the equipment. And two, if you abuse it, we can penalize you. So being able to monitor it actually allows a whole new business model and a whole new industry to grow up. So we think that could be very disruptive in the manufacturing space. And we see, with the Internet of Things, there's a lot of future potential and a lot of things are being promised and all these incredible things that could be done. And it will happen over time. It will certainly happen over time. But there's a huge amount of things that can be done today that has massive benefit. And we think that there's often very, very simple solutions, very simple things that we can give visibility on, which will actually have massive value to organizations. And we're seeing things like just knowing how many hours a piece of equipment is running can offer huge value. And being able to have that accessible on your phone. You can imagine small and medium organizations, they're often very owner-managed, owner-driven. So the guys really want to know at their fingertips 24 hours what's happening in their factory. And so these simple solutions often provide the most value. It doesn't need to get complicated.